Although the conflict was called the French and Indian War, the war was between the British and the French. The reason it was referred to as the French and Indian War is because so many Native Americans allied with the French. This map shows the colonization of the Americas at the time of the French and Indian War. The red is owned by the British, and these are what we know as the 13 colonies. The orange areas are controlled by the Spanish, and the gigantic blue area is controlled by the French. However, a lot of the French territory was very far inland and not very valuable. The purple areas were French areas that were taken over by the British. However, the French did have some very valuable territory along the Mississippi River, specifically the area along the Ohio River Valley, which happened to be near the border of British influence. Boundaries between the French influence and the British influence were not very clearly defined, so there were frequent disputes over where this line actually was. In an attempt to make these boundaries a little more defined, the French began building forts to claim the territory. The British responded by building a fort of their own near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but the fort was attacked and seized by the French. Colonial General George Washington was sent to take the fort back from the French, but failed. Although George Washington lived in Virginia, which was one of the 13 colonies, he was British. All of the colonists in the 13 colonies considered themselves British and part of the British Empire. Therefore, if Great Britain was fighting a war, the colonists were involved. The most significant thing that happened at the Albany Conference was the colonies asking for the British to appoint a supreme commander of the troops in the colonies. This is important because this is one of the first times that the colonies were seen as united, especially from a military standpoint. George Washington and local militia troops headed west under a new British general by the name of Edward Braddock. Their regiment was attacked by the French and Braddock was killed. George Washington famously saved the local militia by leading a very elaborate retreat. This shows that the British troops were beatable. The Native Americans especially take note of this. The Native Americans side with the French because the French and Native Americans were better able to coexist. The last thing that the Native Americans wanted was to be left on the American continent with only the British. Major Robert Rogers is one of the most well-known colonial soldiers prior to the American Revolutionary War. I personally think he'd make an excellent project topic. After 2 years of fighting along the underdeveloped Ohio River Valley, the British finally start to pull ahead. The European theater of the French and Indian War was known as the 7 Years' War, and in this theater is where the British first start to see an advantage. In America, the British eventually rally and take Fort Duquesne, the fort we talked about earlier near Pittsburgh. It becomes called Fort Pitt, which is why we now have the city of Pittsburgh. British General Wolfe also has a major victory against the French General Montcalm near Quebec City. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris is signed, ending the French and Indian War. French power is virtually eliminated from the New World. However, relations are now strained between the 13 colonies and the British. Anticipate how the war could have hurt their relationship.